All right, folks, I've got 5:30, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order for the 2025-26 budget retreat. And at this time, I would ask that you bow your heads for the invocation. Dear Lord, we wish to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be able to gather here this evening to discuss the business of our town. Lord, we ask that you guide and direct us as we attempt to do your will and to do those things that are in the best interest of the citizens of this town. These things we humbly ask in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, this time I would ask Commissioner Evans, if you would, to lead us in the pledge. Everybody, welcome. Okay, at this time, the ladies have got some snacks here. I'll ask y'all if you'll go ahead and get whatever snacks you want. And as soon as everybody can grab a snack, we'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to Sean to start on the budget workshop presentation.
Started with our fiscal year 25-26 budget retreat. I want to say, just as a matter of housekeeping, we are recording tonight's meeting. There's a couple of microphones at this table and that table, but as we're asking questions, or if you have any questions or suggestions or comments, please remember to grab the microphone before you speak so that your comments are recorded for the presentation online, and of course for the minutes as well. All right. So tonight, I appreciate you being here, commissioners and department heads and town staff. Tonight, we're going to cover a series of topics. As you can see, we've got a PowerPoint presentation prepared. And again, feel free to stop and ask questions, offer input, suggestions as we go along. We are going to be covering a lot of topics at a somewhat expedited pace. So I want to give you the disclaimer up front that you're more than welcome to contact myself, contact department heads, as we move into the budget process. In other words, after the budget retreat, for specific questions about departments as the department commissioners, or general questions about town related items for me. Just want to throw that out there to remind you that that is an option that exists, especially as you get home and you're looking at it and you're thinking about it, and there's conversation tonight that you're thinking about, or any type of, again, questions, suggestions, or feedback. So tonight, what we're going to cover primarily is, where does our money come from and where does it go? We want to cover current cash balances and capital reserves. We want to cover what is fund balance and potentially the creation of a fund balance policy. We want to cover debt service. We want to cover our projects. What have we done? What do we want to do? And what are we currently doing? We want to cover our 25-26 fiscal year townwide changes, both the changes that we are aware of and the changes that we are anticipating or expecting, but changes that may not be final or changes that may be subject to change. In other words, we want to tell you what we know, both from a standpoint of things we can count on next year and things we think we can count on next year. We want to talk to you some about department needs. And finally, we want to conclude tonight's presentation with surplus, both what it is and what we can do with it. So quite simply, where does our money come from and where does it go? You'll see in the picture here on the slide that we are in fact walking a tightrope every year as we look at both of our utility fund accounts and our general fund, for lack of a better term, accounts. Our departments that fall within utility fund and our departments that fall within general fund. It's no secret that, primarily speaking, every year we have more requests than what we're capable of funding in any given fiscal year. Tonight, we want to present you with a plan that would be geared at the line of thinking for the next 2 to 3 years, with suggestions about how we incorporate and start that plan this year. Of course, there's going to be some topics as they relate to projects and other items that we've already started. And we'll be looking for input and feedback on how we move forward, if there's any changes needed, if staff is on the right track with those projects. And of course, if staff needs to make any changes to those projects. So we walk a tightrope. We, generally speaking, balance our expenses liberally and our revenues conservatively in our budget model. That's, again, general fund versus our utility fund. And we'll get into where that money comes from, what the revenue for each of those funds looks like, what the expenses to each of those funds look like. But we'll start with general fund. So where does the general fund revenue come from? Primarily speaking, it's made up of property taxes, shared revenues meaning utility franchise taxes, telecom taxes, video taxes, electric taxes, to name a few, ABC taxes, which will be alcohol beverage tax, and sales tax. Investment earnings being the third category from our major revenue sources on the general fund revenue. And just to give you some idea, today, April 3rd, 2025, we are currently earning 4.23% on our North Carolina cash management account, which does make up primarily all of our investment earnings currently. But I want to draw your attention to our chart, and you can get some idea of where we are and where we've been. So we start with 2022, which is going to be a theme. So you'll see 2022, 2023, 2024. We want to give you a snapshot of the recent past, but we want to make sure you understand where we are currently as well. So you can see it's broken down. This, again, is for general fund. I want to remind you, utility fund. So try and keep that in mind when you're looking at the numbers. You can see our property taxes, we increased from 2020, as an example, 2022 to 2023 by 55,000 collected. And we increased our property taxes by 2023 to 2024 by 11,000. Again, that's the collective number. That is not the evaluation or the change in evaluation on the account. And then you'll see the percent listed as well. So what does general fund pay for? Revenues versus expenditures. Again, we're budgeting revenues conservatively, expenses and expenditures liberally. So for our revenue side, you've got unrestricted intergovernmental funds, sales tax, utility tax, ABC, alcoholic beverage tax. On the revenue side, you've got restricted intergovernmental funds, those being grant monies, POW bill monies, things of that nature. You have other revenues accounted for in the form of interest earned on investment accounts, the sale of assets, surplus being an example of that. And there is some miscellaneous revenue, albeit a very small amount. That's basically a catch-all term for this conversation. You have ad valorem taxes, and then you have sales and services. The sales and services being made up of admin costs, waste management costs, post office costs, post office revenue, fire department revenue, waste management revenue. So again, on the left-hand side of your screen, these are all of our revenues. This is purely from the money we take in. This does not account for any expenditures, and this is not indicative of revenues over expenditures. It's just to show you how the revenues that we take in break down. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I suppose it's your left hand, my right hand, you'll see the same accounted for our expenses on the general fund. Those being transportation and streets, which is streets and POW bill, environmental protection, solid waste cost, mosquito cost, lake management cost, general government costs from public officials, post office, zoning, administration, and then public safety accounting for 49%. I will tell you, from my observation, from a professional recommendation, our expenditures and to some degree mostly, I should say, our revenues are in a healthy place. Your public safety is always going to account for the most of your expenditures. That's by default the services we offer, that primarily being police and fire services for our citizens. There's just always a cost associated with that. I don't want you to think the 49% is extreme. It is, in fact, a healthy number and a good place to be overall. I will give you just a brief bullet point from the public safety standpoint. The 49% is a little misleading because we do have a volunteer fire department, not a paid fire department. In other words, if the town were to transition to a paid fire department over the course of some years or some time, you can expect that public safety number to rise if we don't adjust our revenue model or any type of revenues over expenditures that you see listed in this chart. So that being the general fund, this is the utility fund. On our utility fund revenues, that's pretty simple. We get them from water revenues, we get them from wastewater revenues, and we get them from investment earnings. In other words, we send out a water bill. The water bill has those charges on it. We collect the water bill charges, and that primarily makes up your utility fund. The investment earnings are the North Carolina cash management account. They are consolidated from general fund and utility fund under the cash management account, so as we earn interest, as you'll see on a couple of slides, collectively instead of individually, meaning we have $6.8 million in our cash management account that we're earning interest on, but that is collectively utility funds and general fund monies. And as we go through tonight, you'll see how all that breaks down. But again, you'll see a snapshot of 2022, 2023, 2024. I do want to put your that is not indicative of our water revenue account and the shape and the health of our water revenue as a utility account. That is primarily and pretty much solely as a result of less water sold, meaning what we bring water revenue in basically by the amount of water that we sell. Wastewater is a little more tricky because you've got a lot more added expense that goes into the treatment of the wastewater facility, that goes into the maintenance of the lift stations, that goes into various methods of wastewater treatment in general. But the water revenue does look like it's declining, but I want to point out that is not indicative of the shape of our water account. And you can see we were a little behind in 2022, 2023. 2021, just so you know, it's not reflected here, but 2021, we had a boom in sales for water, partly, in my opinion, from the result of the staycation model that was advertised by the North Carolina Department of Commerce and the North Carolina Governor's Office. We sold a ton of water in 2021. Our budget was artificially high in 2022 because we had to have some way of forecasting what that revenue model would be for budgetary purposes to set our water rate. We missed that mark by less than 1%, but that's why you see it listed there in red. 2021 was so much higher than 2020. And as we've moved forward, 2022, 2023, 2024, those water sales have stabilized and we're able to get much better projections. In fact, we were 2.65% over our projections last year. And again, our budget model is budgeting revenues conservatively, expenditures liberally. So that's where we want to be for our particular budget model. What does our utility fund pay for? On this slide, a lot of colors, a lot of charts. They all obviously represent different things. Wastewater charges make up about 56% of our utility fund. Water charges make up about 36% of our utility fund. And again, just by nature, you have more costs associated with wastewater than you do water. And therefore your wastewater revenues and your wastewater, essentially what you charge for wastewater services is going to be higher than the water. And as a result, your wastewater revenue is going to be higher than your water revenue. This is what I would call your attention to. 80% of our revenue that we collected last year was made up of late fees. That's obviously a good thing from a cash on hand standpoint. I think that's probably a bad thing for forecasting our budget moving forward. We do want to, as a suggestion to the board, staff is considering and suggesting that we lower our late fees from $50 to $35 as a way of bringing the late fees in line with surrounding agencies, surrounding municipalities, surrounding utility fund accounts. Also reducing some of the burden on our utility customer billing side. For instance, as but one example, Camp Clearwater bills are lower than other minimum bills around town because Camp Clearwater has a compactor, primarily speaking, on their where all their users contribute to. They do not have the cost of of rollout carts and recycling bins, et cetera. So their minimum bill accounts for water and wastewater. And then as I understand it, Camp Clearwater charges them for their sanitation costs. Their minimum bill is lower than what we are charging on our late fees, just barely, but lower, which causes by nature a tremendous amount of work on our utility customer billing, because they have to go through those bills individually to apply the late fee to the Camp Clearwater residents that are not paying on time, because our system doesn't catch it as a late account because the bill is lower than the late fee. So it's more than just lowering the bill to lower it, but in full transparency, we increased the late fee because we had so many people that were falling into the late fee category. It's clear by the numbers that increasing the late fee has not worked. So instead of relying on the late fee as a revenue stream for a healthy account moving forward, I would suggest to you that we bring that late fee down, although it seems counterintuitive, so that we can stabilize our late fee projections moving forward and get back to our system being able to account for all the bills, and in turn reducing the amount of power, the amount of employee time spent during the billing process as well. But again, 8% of our revenues collected in 23-24 were late fees. You can see how the expenses, as I mentioned earlier, balance out. You've got a 53% spent on the wastewater, on the water, and 46% on the utility fund. Again, these numbers are a little misleading because of the amount of the revenue collected versus the amount of the expenditures. The revenue of wastewater is higher than the revenue of water. Your percentages look a little bit different because of that. Current cash balances. This is where we're going to start talking about our fund balance and cash and liquidity that we have available to us as a governing body. First of all those numbers are green. That's a good start. We're not in the red. You can see the First Bank consolidated account. That represents the money that we have in the bank. That's the most simple term to think about that. We have a couple accounts with First Bank, but that by nature is consolidated. It does account for water. It does account for wastewater. It does account for general fund monies. They're all, for this purpose, put together, consolidated. We typically like to have around $500,000 in our First Bank account collectively. We do that for a number of reasons, but primarily we have a formula-driven fee that our account is charged by, essentially just for bank services. And when we get below that $500,000, we start incurring, or we're subject to, some of those fees on the individual accounts that kick into play. And of course, we don't want to pay those fees. So we've sort of unofficially set that limit, or that in-house that limit, for lack of a better term, at $500,000. Our North Carolina Cash Management Fund, as you can see, is $6.8 million, again, consolidated. Future slide will show you what the numbers look like broken down by fund, but for some idea, we try and keep as much money in cash management right now as we can, because that's earning 4.23%. Our First Bank account is not earning anything. So for the $500,000 that I mentioned, we try and keep at the First Bank account. The $500,000 is something that we evaluate monthly. However, just given the nature of government financing, that number really swings wildly from the beginning of the month to the end of the month and in between the month, based on when bills are sent out, when bills are collected, and then of course, when we pay for our expenses through our accounts receivable process. So it looks like it's high right now. We do evaluate that monthly. It does swing from the $450,000 to $700,000 range. When we build up an excess, we transfer that into cash management so that we're collecting as much interest on these accounts as we can. To give you some idea of the interest collected from cash management, when I started here in 2021, we were earning 0.25%. I think it was like $1,000 to $2,000 annually that we earned in our investment. And that was, of course, during COVID. We are now up to 4%. We're in that $150,000 to $300,000 range annually that we're earning on our investments. And then cash on hand is just simply what we have in the building. That's a combination of drug fund monies at the police department, a combination of miscellaneous cash, a combination of cash register drawers, things of that nature. We also reconcile that daily for our cash drawers, of course, but collectively month. And I shouldn't say month, that's a little bit misleading. We do random checks with the police department for their drug money so that it's part of our auditing process to account for what is there, because that can be a large sum of money at any given time. All right. So now we come into the capital reserve conversation of how we delegate funds and how we account for our fund balance and how we look at overall the general health of our town organization, particularly from a long-term standpoint, not an annual standpoint. Of course, the budget, balancing the budget, how much surplus, to some degree, how much surplus, how close we are on expenditures, that's more indicative of a healthy annual budget. But for our capital reserves, I really would encourage you to think of these as earmarked funds. A capital reserve by general statute is not how we operate for our capital reserve accounts. We call them capital reserves as a budgetary vehicle only, meaning town board, mainly through the budgetary process, but sometimes individually through budget ordinances, sets aside money for future projects. We earmark those funds in our internal accounting and in our finance software system, but collectively they are part of your unappropriated fund, or excuse me, they're part of your fund balance. So as you can see here, we're pretty much split 30, 30, 30 on our unappropriated capital reserves for our utility accounts and that general fund account, which is healthy. And again, I want to let you know that in the future, you can expect probably some capital projects for water, both loan grant money that may have matching funds or self-funded projects. The same holds true for wastewater. So these numbers will fluctuate, but 30 to 40% in the general fund is a good place to be. We'll talk about on the subsequent slide, not the next slide, but a subsequent slide, of what a fund balance policy looks like. And then we'll make a couple of recommendations on that. But for your general fund, that is a healthy number. So capital reserves for your general fund, this is how they break apart. And I want to point out a couple of slides so that you can see what I was talking about earlier. So capital reserves at earmark. So we are earmarking with general fund top 1/3. That is not down the bottom. So it's listed this way because of the way it gets back to that capital reserve on the vehicle for our budgetary purposes. However, that is a true capital reserve, meaning funds collected for aquatic reserve must be spent on aquatic control and lake management tasks. That comes down to how we collect money for those aquatic control reserve funds, mainly through lake management fees that are collected on water bills. We collect that money for a specific purpose. So that's why it's notated at the bottom. I want to make sure you're aware of that notation. There's $327,000 roughly in the general fund that is set aside for that specific purpose. And then you see a chart of what that is. Again, this pie chart's a little misleading because you have so much unappropriated, but that's a good thing. Meaning, as unexpected expenses pop up, as one-time purchases pop up, you as the board have the ability, staff has the ability, of course, to make the recommendation to you for consideration of utilizing those funds as needed. Say we get a hurricane. This is a great place to pull money from, knowing you will replenish that money moving forward. That's the type of funds you want for unappropriate, or the type of uses you want for your general fund unappropriated fund balance. And again, that's why it makes up so much of the account collectively. So our capital reserves for utility fund on water. You'll see again, earmarked for different accounts. Our water fund unappropriated balance is in a very healthy place. And our water system improvement project there, the 873,000, does not account for the Sandy Ridge project. So there's $275,000, generally speaking, that was already earmarked or designated by the board for that Sandy Ridge project. As a reminder, that project, if we are anticipating to pay that off in 3 to 5 years, that will replenish the money that we have in our capital system water improvement project. We are spending money to make money. That's a healthy way to utilize these type of money on our utility fund. There's always going to be problems with the utilities. That's the reality of the business that we're in. You'll see probably, I believe it's in May or June, you'll see through our asset management plan, through our water asset and inventory assessment project, that there are a ton of different areas we can start thinking about. I shouldn't say a ton. Obviously, our water system is meeting state standards and is capable of providing a strong service to our community. That does not mean we can't take opportunities to invest it and be proactive instead of waiting for a problem to occur and then being reactive as a result. But as that asset management plan comes to fruition, you will see suggestions on projects, both capital and projects that are capable of self-funding, where we can utilize these type of monies and or monies out of our annual budget to start working on our system and making necessary upgrades and improvements to improve that quality of service to our citizens and our customers. So capital reserves on the wastewater side. There's a few more of these. Two things about you will see our lake water benefit. Designation by the state of North Carolina. It is reasonable to expect our wastewater system has some effect on our lake management system, our lake management quality and clarity, and therefore we can contribute funds collected for waste management to lake water projects. We have $119,000 there. So if you recall, $350,000, $120,000, collectively, we have roughly $470,000 to spend for lake management. And we do, getting ahead of myself a little bit, but since we're on the subject, we do typically account for roughly 1 cent of ad valorem taxes to that fund as well. So we have a way of growing that fund, but that's where we stand today, roughly $500,000. The other thing I want to point out here is our debt service. $184,000. Our model is that we want to be 1 year ahead on our payment structure. That's how we build our rates. We have 2 projects that we did on sewer sanitary improvement projects, phase 1 and phase 2. Collectively, they are roughly, we make 4 payments a year on those, 2 interest payments and 2 interest plus principal payments. Collectively, they are $340,000 combined. So you see $680,000 there. Essentially what has happened here is that phase 1 was delayed. Our first payment was delayed. We put that money into our capital reserve to earmark that money for our payment when the project was completed, and we did not draw from this fund to make that payment. So there's roughly $340,000 that the town staff will be suggesting to the board to reallocate, re-earmark, if you will, into whether it's capital reserve accounts listed above, whether it's the general fund for wastewater. As you can see, the unappropriated wastewater fund balance is a little below 50% as it stands right now. Or there may be some projects in the budget that we want to pay for with one-time purchases on the wastewater side specifically. So I want to let you know that that is forthcoming and bring it to your attention. But even expending the $340,000, that will keep us with 1 year's worth of payments in the event that we have a catastrophe or a disaster or a major problem with our wastewater during our fiscal year. And we have to draw from those funds to make our loan payments to stay in good standing on both of those loans. The PAL bill capital reserves. These are, again, truly capital reserves. PAL bill money can only be spent for PAL bill related expenditures. There are very set forth requirements. They change from year to year, but generally speaking, they are repaving roads, regrading roads, cold patches for roads, general maintenance and upkeep of your roads and infrastructure as it relates to town streets. They're separate there just to give the board the full picture. The bottom line is what I want you to focus on. These monies are basically collected every year by a direct appropriation from the state, from the PAL bill monies. We have a budget set forth. The capital reserve street repairs is monies that are budgeted every year to go into that specific account. The PAL bill money is money that rolls over from unspent budgeted items in the annual capital, in the annual PAL bill department. But again, I want you to focus on the bottom line, $145,000. And it should also be noted that there are requirements on the PAL bill for age limitations of when you have to spend the money. So staff is cognizant of these requirements. Staff will be, in fact, I've met with our Public Works Director and our Public Works crew leader not long ago to start talking about different roads that may require attention so that we're staying underneath our thresholds and able to receive PAL bill monies every year to keep this in a healthy place. All right, so now we just talked about all the money that we have. Let's talk about what fund balance is and what it can be used for. I've sort of hit on this already, but this is a whole snapshot collectively of what it is for our accounts. And then to the left-hand side of your screen, excuse me, I guess that would be your right-hand side. I'll get these directions figured out by the end of the presentation. Essentially, what I want you to keep in mind is what can it be used for? Emergencies, unforeseen events, unexpected opportunities, and then to avoid short-term borrowing, and that's the one-time cost purchases. What it cannot be or should not be used for, reoccurring expenses. That's the number one thing that I see and hear about where governing bodies get in trouble when they fund reoccurring expenses with fund balance costs. Hiding deficits. Of course, we want to be transparent with those costs and unnecessary accumulation. In other words, you do reach a point where you have to spend it or you lose it. You don't necessarily lose the money, but you have to lower your tax rate. We're not anywhere close to that. Which brings us to a fund balance policy. I would like to ask for your input on this. I'd like for you to consider and give it some thought. I will tell you, first and foremost, what it is. Fund balance policy is a policy set forth for staff to maintain a certain amount of money in your fund balance at all times. There is a misconception and misnomer that 8% is required by general statute for your fund balance. That is not true. 8% is a suggested amount, and 8% is an enforced amount, but not a statutorily enforced amount. LGC would tell you 30%. LGC would tell you, actually, if I'm being truthful, LGC would tell you a synopsis of your region. They would look at the municipalities around you and then give you an average of that. LGC would tell you at least 30%. What we've done here is a couple of things here. We have given you our fund balance percentage in 23 and 24. That's 54%. That is 54% less our earmarked funds, which are called capital reserve in our budget, and less the 8% committed funds. So 54% is our unappropriated fund balance total for our utility and our general fund combined today, or as of our last audit. Underneath that, you will see 23-24 budget using that 54%. But as an example, a 30% threshold would be 1.3 million. A 50% threshold would be 2.2 million. A 70% threshold, 3.1 million. And how that breaks down versus general fund and utility fund. Staff's recommendation for you to consider is that we set that mark at 50%. 50% because of primarily the needs that you will see on the forthcoming slides. In other words, I think that we have a lot of opportunity to use money for one-time purchases as a catch-up mechanic especially as it comes to some of our aging fleet vehicles in the police department and fire department, as but one example, but one-time purchases. And 50% as a way of utilizing projects in our utility fund as they become available to us. I think, and we'll get into this in a minute too, but I think we have an opportunity as a financial governing body to invest more in long-term projects where costs are spread out to increase the debt service portfolio of our account to better utilize monies that we've received and do more things, increase our efficiency and effectiveness on all of our services combined, and again, use it in some ways as a catch-up mechanic. What staff is asking the board to do is to consider the recommendation, give it some thought, and in May, we will more than likely have this as an agenda item, take action on to set a percentage moving forward via fund balance policy so that staff is able to maintain the percentage that the board sets moving forward. And I should also point out that's not set in stone. You can always adjust that every annual. In my recommendation, if you want to adjust it, you would look at that every fiscal year annually. But it can be adjusted moving forward. I think 50% though is a good place to start. In our region, it seems like we're just below our region average, just for your context. All the municipalities in our region, big or small, were in that 55 to 60% range, if memory serves. That is in your audit snapshot from our audit report that was received for our 23-24 fiscal audit, if you want to go back and double check that. But again, staff will ask for action on this during our May monthly agenda for our Board of Commissioner meeting. On the debt service, this is where I talk about there being opportunity. Some of those get into people instruct be a new fire. What a thing. Public Works trucks, phase 1, phase 2 project. And I may have missed one, but anyway, we have opportunity here. We do not have a lot of debt service on our account. In other words, we are paying most of our cost out of pocket right now as it relates to expenditures on our account. We had some debt service and it sort of all rolled off at one time. Now we have opportunity to consider adding more debt service to basically diversify our portfolio and stretch those funds out, particularly funds in the general fund. And we'll come to these. I don't want you to focus on the suggested. We'll come to those in the departments themselves. I just want to give you a snapshot of what debt service looks like. And of course, all the debt service, flexibility for general fund, for water fund, for wastewater, and then individually what that looks like. Any question on finance before we move into the next topic for tonight? Okay. So now we want to shift gears and we want to talk about projects. Projects, what have we done? What are we doing? And what are we wanting? So we'll start with what have we done, completed projects. You'll see the Stormwater Master Plan on here. That was a grant that the town received. The Streetscape Master Plan, another grant that the town received. Our site study, we utilized American Rescue Plan dollars to complete that. That was primarily focused on upgrades and different projects we could do for our town hall complex. Out of that study, we identified the need to add on to our fire station and to basically shift our police department across the complex to build them a new police department and utilize the existing police department for a lake management / public works office space. We've completed a lake strategic management plan that was done with the Lumber River Council of Governments. We've completed a wastewater asset and inventory study that was done with engineering services and the Council of Government. And we've completed our part, so to speak, of the outdoor recreation economy plan. So what projects do we have currently? We are in the midst of working on and completing a payroll study, personnel policy rewrite, and or update. Our personnel policy and our salary study was last looked at in 2018. And that's, I would tell you, is similar from an organizational, especially organizational equity standpoint, to the conversation of tax base and the conversation to reevaluation. In other words, every 5 to 7 years, you want to be looking at these topics just to get an idea of where you are regionally as an organization, and also to address any shortcomings of the policies of your organization from an operational standpoint, and really just a playbook, if you will, for town staff. I can tell you that our personnel policy is outdated, to say the least. COVID was a big time, extreme factor in this. Essentially the art, what goes into employment changed overnight, essentially, when COVID hit. And our personnel policy does not address many of the topics of human resources that we see today. Staff spends a lot of time right now with North Carolina League of Municipalities, as well as Lumber River Council of Governments, as well as the School of Government, working through complex human resources issues that could be, not all, but could be addressed with our personnel policy. As of now, we are planning and preparing for a presentation on May 5th. Excuse me, it's not May 5th, May 13th at the May Board of Commissioners meeting for our salary study results and our personnel policy rewrite or suggestions to update our personnel policy. The MAPS group out of Cary, North Carolina is doing that study and that rewrite, and they will be here in person to both give a presentation to our board and answer any questions that the board may have. We are also working, as mentioned earlier, on a water asset inventory study. This study is all but complete. We are going through the asset management plan portion of that now. Once we have that, again, we'll have a roadmap of where our water system stands, what our water system consists of. We'll have some resources available to our staff, such as GIS, which is basically digital maps. And we will have some idea of at least recommendations of how to spend money on our water system to improve it moving forward. And it should be noted too, that some of the projects in the water asset inventory study, or that come from that study, will be combination projects with wastewater, or we'll have the opportunity to combine them with wastewater, so that we're working on both, because we do have an asset management plan for wastewater that you can do simultaneously from the standpoint of we do have water and wastewater systems across the lake that are located in close proximity. In other words, if you're going to dig a hole, let's address what's in the ground at the same time, instead of digging one hole today and then coming back tomorrow and digging a new hole when the infrastructure is available to us at that time. And I should also note, on that line of thinking, we may incorporate PAL bill money to work on streets once those projects are done. I think that's a good term, or a good example of what I would call smart money. You've dug your hole, you replace your infrastructure, and you've taken care of the surface, the asphalt, all in one project, so to speak. You can move on to the next one with that. We will be coming to you with the aforementioned fund balance policy rewrite in May. That's a project that we are near completion on. We have an internal control policy rewrite that is taking place now. If you recall, on our audit every year, we are dinged for internal control policy. A lot of that is just in nature of a small organization. There's always going to be internal control questions when you have 20 employees. One person can only do so much. You can only spread so many tasks out collectively. However, we think this policy will give us a good chance to address some of those concerns, so that when and where we can, 2 and 3 people will have the opportunity, as it relates to financial task, to put hands on it or put eyes on it to avoid any type of potential corruption or any type of potential issues. We are in the midst of working with Commissioner Hawley, as well as the Agriculture Extension Officer. I have that correct? on a town landscaping project idea to give ourselves some curb appeal. That would do our landscaping for our signs, and that would also be landscaping around our town hall complex. But we want to be cognizant of the fact that this is a tourist-based town, and we do rely heavily on recreation, and we want to make sure we're looking the part as well as being the part. And we have our multi-use path expansion project that's working with, and this is just for lack of a better term, but we are working with North Carolina State Department Landscape Design on completing our path. I spoke with that group not long ago. They are coming to a conclusion on that project. They expect that to be done, I think, in the next 30 to 45 days, as I understand it. They have some ideas of the Highway 53 side, but I do want the board to know that is certainly the hardest part of this project. And I think we're going to have to get creative. So keep that in mind. But I think from all indications, and I'm not seeing any illustrations, but I think that we will be very proud of this expansion project, and this will give us a way to talk to our legislation and our General Assembly members on a project that would be competitive to fund and not just an extension of the path that we already have. It's not listed here, but we're also working on a utility rate study. We're doing that with the Rural Water Center. The idea here is that we want to simplify how we bill for our water and wastewater. If you've looked at our utility rates structure that we currently have, I think you need a PhD to decipher exactly how that works. And we do rely on technology to help us guide us, help us formulate the different tiers that we have. We have a tier model that's in place currently. We're looking at basically going to more of a flat rate structure, and one that staff would feel more confident in implementing, and one that staff would feel more confident in forecasting. And then the last thing I want to mention, just briefly, sorry, team, is the Sandy Ridge Waterline Extension Project. They are almost through with the surveying for that project. After they're done with the surveying, they will move into applying for state bids. And once the bids have been, I said bids, I'm sorry. They are moving into state permits. Once the state permits have been acquired, we will move into the bid process. So you'll start to see some work in addition to the work that's already taken place, because you're currently seeing work on the wastewater side of the equation, which was funded by the developer. That was funded by Sandy Ridge to connect onto our current wastewater system. You'll start to see work on the water side taking place probably in the next 3 to 6 months. Okay, future projects. At the top of our list is Lake Clarity and Lake Quality. And I do want to tell you that we have received some feedback on the 2 proposals that we have now, Solitude as well as the Clark brothers. And we can have a conversation about this, and I think we'll need to for an action item moving forward at a meeting, a future meeting. But the recommendation for staff is going to be to dismiss both of those proposals. In other words, we do not see the benefit, and we've not been given any explanation from folks that have reviewed that with any type of credentials on the benefit we would have for the lake, especially as it relates to the cost associated with the project. In other words, we think we can find a better way to spend that money. Consider that. Of course, we're going to have a more detailed conversation when it comes to that. But as part of our budget retreat, I want to let you know that that is the direction that staff is moving in. And again, we'll have a conversation as an action item in a future meeting to either dismiss or take action on, or potentially list a request for qualifications, request for proposals on contracted services that could be beneficial to improving lake clarity and lake quality. The next project is our sewer improvement phase 3 project. You can see the cost now with inflation is $4.8 million. This project started off at $3.1 or $3.2 million. So every year that goes on, the price goes up. I think this price is probably not indicative of the tariff conversation that's currently taking place now and all the materials that are subject to those tariffs as part of this project. To give staff, to give the board some idea, the project that staff is seeking grant money on has solicited the General Assembly for and continues to work with our Congress members for is to replace all of our lift stations outside of Camp Clearwater. So I think there's 8 lift stations total that will be replaced with generators, with new submersible pumps, with new bypass systems where applicable, and basically a new A to Z lift station system capable of keeping up better with our flows just with modern technology improvements, as well as upgrading the horsepower, upgrading the capability of the system itself. So collectively, all 8 lift stations, you can imagine the effect that would have on our system as it pumps, well, gravity dumps into our main line. And as the main line is pumped to our wastewater treatment facility, the project will be transformational for the way we treat wastewater. That's a big part of that. There is some I&I work in there to reduce I&I. There's some work in there to reduce exfiltration. And there is some work in there to make a couple of improvements at the wastewater treatment plant. So it's a massive project and a critically needed project. And we continue to convey the need to those aforementioned groups. However, we have not been successful in procuring the funding yet. We are not successful with the state through DEQ from the standpoint of receiving funds because of the limited scope of funds that are available currently at the state level. I say we're not successful in receiving funds. We are very successful in their scoring metrics. We actually have the 10th best project in the state of North Carolina for our wastewater program based on scoring alone. And that is not competing with any viable units. That is competing with everybody outside of viable unit or the distress unit conversation. We're competing with Durham, we're competing with Charlotte, we're competing with Raleigh, Wilmington, Fayetteville, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have the 10th best project out of 60 projects. The need is clearly there for that project. The funding is not. The state received $1.3 billion of funding requests during the last fall funding cycle. They funded $250 million collectively with water and wastewater projects. So as you're having conversations with General Assembly members, as you're having conversations with congressmen, as you're having conversations with funding sources, please continue to convey this need, because applying for the state is giving us through the state programs is giving us a really good indicator of how much we need the project, but is not looking like it's going to be successful for getting grant monies to fund the project in the near future. We do have the option with the state to take a loan. Some of this, and we do have the option for some of that loan to be forgivable. But as of the last funding cycle, we were only eligible for 30% forgivable monies. So what we're doing right now is, of course, continuing to ask. We're continuing to work with our lobbyists. We're continuing to work with really anybody that'll listen in terms of funding agency. But we are starting to put funds aside so that we can potentially give ourselves options as our demographics change, as funding sources criteria change, as opportunities present themselves. But that is unfortunately a bleak update. However, an important update for the board to hear as it relates to our sewer system project. And it should be noted that the phase 1 and phase 2 have seen roughly a 45%, 35 to 45%, depending on the time of year, decrease in I&I. So those 2 projects have made a tremendous impact on potential nutrients that are going into the lake, as well as just overall capability to treat wastewater and the health of our system. The board has done a phenomenal job, especially given the resources available to you, at being proactive and trying to do something to better this town. We just still have some work to do from that regard. The sports complex project here is the project that's been discussed in the past. This, of course, is accounting for potentially a town park. It's accounting for stormwater control measures. It's accounting for soccer fields. It's accounting for baseball fields. It's accounting for multi-use path extension. There's a lot that goes into this, but roughly at $3.5 million, that is the cost per a preliminary engineer study of what it would take to fund that project. And then you see the phase 2 multi-use path. I will tell you that if I can back up just a second, phase 3 for our sewer improvement project, the rehab fire station, construction of police department, and the sports complex are the 3 projects that we lobbied for at the General Assembly level this year. Commissioner Womble and I were in Raleigh 2 weeks ago to start that process. We were intentional and we were deliberate about our requests. We made sure that the General Assembly that we could meet with understood that we were ready to spend this money tomorrow. We were not asking for money to spend money 2 years from now. And we made sure to answer any questions they had as it related to projects. And we did our best to tie these projects into the current funding strategies that the General Assembly is working for on their long session budget now. We saw, in my opinion, I think Commissioner Womble would echo these thoughts from our conversations that we've had. We saw the value of a lobbyist that day. Sam Schumann walked right past every legal assistant that we encountered, essentially. We had direct access to folks that do not represent our district that serve key roles on these different funding committees that we were able to talk with about our projects that by and large supported our projects, especially our projects from the sewer improvement project and our fire station police department project. Public safety is a big funding priority in this long session for this budget. And Sam put us in contact with 5 or 6 senators alone that were directly associated with public safety or appropriations committees that listened to us for 10 to 30 minutes at a time, that asked us questions, that took notes about our projects. And overall, I think it was a great first impression with the General Assembly for this term, essentially, of what the town of White Lake is looking to do, what we've done, where we want to go. And I have received feedback. In fact, we received feedback that night from Representative Brisson on how impressed he was with both our topics as well as our project list and our general strategy moving forward on how we better serve the citizens of White Lake and the county of Bladen, as well as our tourists that come in. We've received a lot of good feedback, but I do want to take the opportunity to update the board on the work that Sam is doing, as well as the work that Sam continues to do behind the scenes in talking with and following up on. As an example of following up, I got a request from Sam shortly after our meeting from Senator Jackson to send him some dollar amounts associated with tourism. Commissioner Womble helped me procure those. We sent them on Saturday morning. He was impressed to see just the impact that White Lake has when it comes to Bladen County tourism. Is that type of conversation, especially behind the scenes, that will, in my opinion, eventually result in successful projects for us and potentially, hopefully, successful appropriations for our projects. The phase 2 multi-use path here, we actually submitted a local act request on this project. We did this because we knew that we were fixing to have the North Carolina State Landscape Design Team finish our project and complete the path, so to speak. So we submitted a local act request as a way of putting in a request into the budget, so sort of a miscellaneous pot. If there were available funds, we'd love to have them to keep working on a multi-use path, to get shovels in the dirt, to extend that project. But we kept it separate of our priorities this year with the understanding that we could come back next year or potentially for the next budget cycle to complete the path and have that elevated in our priorities as a town board or the General Assembly. I have also worked with Senator Tillis's office and Congressman Rouser's office to convey our request, to have conversations with both of their aides and continue to try and think outside the box for ways that we could find funding or seek letters of support for funding or account for potential grant opportunities that we're not seeing that they may help facilitate. The next project on our future project is our meter project. This is, you see a total of $750,000 there. I want to let you know that would be split between water and wastewater funds. But this is to reimagine the way we bill for our utilities. We have right now been utilizing a Clara metering solutions. They changed their name several times, but Aclara, for lack of a better term. And we utilize with them what's known as basically a direct read system. In other words, the meter pings the tower, the cell phone tower. The cell phone tower sends a signal to the computer in the office, and we get continuous readings. That's great, but it only works for about 50% of our accounts. So we have roughly 3,000 accounts. Today we have 2,600, but with the Sandy Ridge accounts that are coming in the near future, roughly 3,000 accounts. So we spend manpower to read 1,500 meters every month. And that's a process that we take about a week to do with about 8 guys, 7 to 8 guys, depending on the month, depending on the conditions. This new meter project is potentially, we have to put out a request for qualifications. We've had several conversations with several different meter groups, but we are interested in a meter that would be a radio system primarily, initially, that would allow one staff member to ride around, whether it's on a police vehicle or whether the reader is on a police vehicle or a leaf and limb truck or in a public works dedicated truck. The meters would ping to that radio system. You have to drive by them to collect them, but it's not a radius of 5 feet or 10 feet or 25 feet. It's a large radius. That's important to note because, well, 2 reasons. Number one, that same system, that same meter that we're interested in could be utilized for the cell phone read without changing a thing. Same meter. The second thing I would point out there is we are able to use the meter that's in the ground if we can to cut costs. We only have to replace the meter reading device for that system to work. So we're interested in that company for those reasons. The idea here is that we can get our system to a level where we can read it in a day, whether that's sending somebody in a truck or not. But initially, we want to send somebody in a truck to establish a baseline, to prevent spending 50 to 100 man hours a month, probably more than reading meters. You're essentially getting an employee and a half or 2 just by cutting out manual reads for those 1,500 accounts every month. Aclara is a good system. I think that over time, through COVID, through personnel changes, through company changes on their side, we've reached a point where we simply cannot spend money to make Aclara work. We're at a point where what we have now is either outdated or incompatible. And the cost incurred with making it updated would be more than the cost incurred here. So it does make sense to pivot to a potential new company, a company that is local, a company that has an office that we're potentially interested in that we could be at in an hour or less. They have multiple offices. In fact, all the companies we met with were local. Aclara is not local. Their closest base, their home base to us, I believe, is out of Kentucky. So we see that rep, once in a blue moon. So we wanted to be, again, intentional and deliberate about who we were looking at and how we set up this town for future success and how we could do so in a cost-effective manner, albeit at an exorbitant sum, to establish the meters, but in time, have a system that we could transition to that continuous read, where the system is capable of finding a leak overnight. The system is capable of providing reads to our customers when requested. Staff can monitor continuously. And we think this is the best way to get that. I'll tell you that with the radio system, we are not going to, if we move forward with this project, we are not going to read those one time a month. We are going to, by design, again, be intentional and deliberate to read them at least once. We think we can do that in 2 hours or less. We read every meter we've got. So it's a potential huge project for not just our manpower, but as a way of increasing, again, our efficiency and our effectiveness. I would also say to you that you may get some complaints to this project because there are some meters in town that are 40 and 50 and 60 years old. The older a meter is, the less water it reads. A new meter is going to read water that goes through it. So water bills may be artificially higher, albeit slightly, to account for the water that's actually being used and account for the water that's being sold. We will get credit for that on our annual report, just so the board knows that side of it as well. We have to turn into the state every month a report. Every year, but monthly reports, we turn in the annual report at the end of the year that indicate how much water was used and how much water was sold. But this does help in that regard as well. And then you see phase one water improvement project at the bottom. That project is at the bottom because, as we've talked about several times tonight, the asset management plan is forthcoming. We expect some changes in our projects. This project was last put to cost evaluation in 2023. It's outdated to say the least. However, this gives you some idea of what it would cost to start working on some of those phase one water improvements. And this is primarily geared at replacing outdated materials, galvanized pipe, clay pipe. I shouldn't say clay, that's on the wastewater side. But anyway, outdated materials in the ground and update those materials. That's primarily what that would be. On the, Tina, on the water improvement projects, it's not listed here, but the lead and copper project, we did receive a grant for that. If you recall, it was a $2 million grant, a $2 million loan. $1.2 million of that was a grant. $800,000 of that was a loan. We have not been successful in finding a project that we could use with our existing condition of our water lines for that, specifically for lead and copper, due to the requirements of the state. We've not turned that grant down yet, but I want to give you as a board an update that we're having a hard time, believe it or not, trying to find a project that fits the scope. We should not, in my recommendation, take $2 million for the sake of taking $2 million when we've got to pay $800,000 on the back. We're going to continue to look for a project. It's a good grant for us. As of now, we just haven't found one. And we have, I think we have maybe 6 more months, something like that, to find a project before we have to make a decision on that. We are working with the state as well as our engineering firm on project scopes. So what does the 25-26 budget look like? These are some changes at the town level that we are requesting, albeit not suggesting. So follow me there. The rest of our presentation tonight will be so that you can see the individual request from the department heads and the departments themselves. These are some changes that we anticipate or are suggesting. This gets back to what we know and what we think we know. Conversation from the beginning of the presentation tonight. We know that we're going to be converting our finance software in August. That will be converted to a company called Black Mountain, which is a monumental upgrade forward from FMS. We are doing that with a grant that we received from the North Carolina League of Municipalities that will cover 3 years of expenses. That grant also covers all training costs. That grant covers any type of equipment needed to implement that software and covers any type of accounting catch-up work that needs to take place to transition all of our accounts in a healthy place and make sure that the finance software is made for us. I say it's a monumental way forward, not to get into detail or too much detail, but the software system we have now is great for small towns. We do find it to be on the shortcoming side during our busy season. We just have a hard time tracking the transfers at the campground and the individual accounts associated with some of those transfers. We think this will help us. We also think that this will bring us forward into things like credit card payments. We have one credit card machine now, which we were glad to get, but we do pay fees on that. We are having to adjust in real time on what those fees look like. This new software, as but one example, would swipe the card would go directly into the machine. The machine would then print the receipt. So it's streamlined. And it was also made in I think 2020 or 2021. This software was made in conversation with the LGC, which is the governing body for the finances for the state of North Carolina and the North Carolina League of Municipalities. So it's tailor-made for some of our regulations that we adhere to at the state level, which is a good thing for our finance department and our subsequent audits down the road. We are suggesting that we consider transferring our tax collections to Bladen County. As you can see here, we are estimating, based on conversation that we've had with Bladen County, that they would charge us 2% of our collected revenue to transfer those or to collect those taxes. To give you some idea of how tax collection works, the county assesses the value, the county assigns the value, the county creates the scroll, the county sends us the scroll, we collect off of the scroll, county updates the scroll, we update our scroll. You can see how the county is so heavily involved in this process. And it is in other places, not that that's the best way to do things, but it is becoming more and more across the state as best practice for the county to collect the taxes of a municipality, especially a small municipality. You're cutting out the middle. It's a suggestion I would ask you to consider, but again, to give you some idea, it would be 2% of the taxes collected, not the taxes due. That would potentially free up our second position up front to focus on our utility accounts and to give better customer service as it relates to utility questions, as it relates to general information, and as it relates to our waste management conversations, recycling, sanitation, keeping up with the tourism, the busy season, the tourism season on number of pools, size of containers, et cetera, et cetera. Our lobbyist is in here for $43,200. We are suggesting we move forward with that. If you recall, when we when the board approved this contract, we did so that we would come back and reevaluate the services rendered, the conversations had, the overall effect of the lobbyist in the 4.5 months that we signed him effectively into our new budget season. Typically, just as a reminder to the board, typically a lobbyist will charge you $5,000 a month as a somewhat of a retainer, but I guess it's technically services rendered, which would equate to $60,000 a year. We are receiving what the firm Electus Governmental Affairs calls a small town discount, which basically brings us to the $43,200 month. So it's roughly a $16,800 discount that we receive for those services. We are, of course, recommending that we strongly consider moving forward with that. As I mentioned earlier, our presence in Raleigh is growing rapidly. We are having good conversation with people that are key decision makers. Ultimately, that will be up to the board to decide the value. We are thinking, in other words, we don't know, but we have a strong inclination to expect an 11% increase in our property and liability insurance. That shouldn't come as a surprise. Insurance across the board is going up, especially as it relates to natural disasters and just general claims across the state. We are still with the North Carolina League of Municipalities pool for our property and liability insurance, as well as our workers' comp insurance. You have probably seen in the news that the North Carolina League of Municipality health insurance pool has dissolved. I want to make sure that the board understands that does not affect us. We are not part of their health insurance pool, just as a point of clarification. Speaking of our workers' comp, believe it or not, we're estimating a 4.8 decrease in our workers' comp costs. That's a little misleading because we had something like a 50% increase last year in workers' comp costs. So we're still well ahead in terms of costs where we were 2 to 3 years ago. But I'll take a decrease. I think a decrease is better than an increase in this context any day of the week. We are also, based on preliminary conversations with our broker for health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, auxiliary insurance, expecting a 7% increase in town-sponsored health insurances, which again, it's not a surprise. That market, generally speaking, there's an increase in health insurance every year, at least post-COVID, it seems like. And the staff is operating right now on a 2.5% COLA and a 2.5% merit, up to a 2.5% merit for all employees. We have done this for the past 3 to 4 years, and as I understand it, before that, just to give you some idea. But since I've been here, we've done this, so that's where those numbers are coming from. They are identical to last year's budget. So let's talk about general fund department needs. For our public Public Officials Department. This is an election year. Mayor Pro Tem Blunt, Commissioner Suggs, and Commissioner Evans, I believe, are up for reelection this year. So you see the $3,500 cost associated with those elections as a budgetary expense. We have suggested that we increase the employee appreciation for our Christmas party to include our planning board members this year and potentially their families. We're kind of evolving from a standpoint of how we put that event on, but we do think it's important to get to a point where we're including our planning board members and just saying thanks for what they do for us. We are maintaining our $1,000 training education expense for our elected officials. We are adding a meeting meals of $1,000. And that's put in there just because we've had a series of meetings this year and we did not necessarily have those meetings in the past, but moving forward, we want to make sure we have a line item to be able to provide refreshments, provide food, and give you something to enjoy during our meetings, whatever the topic may include. And then our town attorney retainer is represented there based on the proposal received from our town attorney. For administration, we are requesting a part-time administration assistant. And we have it labeled for administration assistant because that's a catch-all term. You will see in our presentation in May as it relates to our salary study and our policy rewrite, some of our job titles are going to be suggested to change. This will be one of them, as well as a couple others, but we want to get away from general titles and get more to organizational titles. And this administration assistant is put in as a means of being able to fill a couple of different roles. We're still kind of on the fence from a staff level about suggesting what direction they head in. But for your information, we're discussing things like marketing. We're discussing things like tourism. We're discussing things like accounting, filing, accounting, reconciliation. We're basically taking a look at the organization and where we're coming up short now and trying to fill that gap with a position like this. We are suggesting town hall upgrades. These are maintenance and repair items. Wallpaper, which is in a state of need. Particularly down in the administration hallway. It's just that time. These things happen. But carpet professionally cleaned and some other minor expenses to keep the building in tip-top shape. I will tell you, we get compliments every time somebody visits our town hall. As an elected official group, you should be extremely proud of the town hall we have here because not one person that comes in, whether they're professional service or an elected official from somewhere else or some type of representative of an organization, comes through that door doesn't say, man, y'all got an awesome facility here. We are suggesting IT upgrades. These are server and router upgrades that are needed, particularly from a firewall standpoint. Again, it's just that time. IT devices have a short lifespan. And to make sure we are at a level of adequacy and competency from a security standpoint, these upgrades will be necessary. And we want to, you'll see the next item is we're suggesting that we invest in training for our new town clerk. And the last item there is that we are looking at exterior repairs, steps, handicap railing, ADA accessible type accessibility, for lack of a better term, but trying to both keep the curb appeal in good states, but also cater and make sure that entrance is available for all. For our post office, you will also see that we are exploring some repairs on this department. The window in our post office has been getting some moisture that is coming in from around the windowsill where that mini foot is in the wall. We addressed this 4 or 5 years ago, and the problem has come back. So, of course, in order to, in some ways, be proactive, we want to go ahead and tackle those before it becomes a bigger problem or a bigger repair. The scanner is a requirement that is coming from the United States Postal Service. They now have to, I guess, like everything else, have to keep digital records on every customer that they have. Every post office box that's rented in that post office has to have all application materials, all information associated with the account. All that has to be scanned and uploaded into the United States Postal Service website database. We used to do that with paper paper files. They were kept on file in Elizabethtown, and the United States Postal Service has changed that requirement. And then you'll see the AC repair from a moisture leak as part of, it's a separate project, but it goes into that window repair mentioned earlier. For the zoning department, this is simple. We just need new decals for our zoning permits. For our police department, you will see at the top of our request, patrol rifles, ammunition, slings, optics, lights, and of course you can read the sums there, but we understand in working with our police department that we are behind the times. We are bringing a knife to a gunfight, so to speak. This is it may be sort of a common theme in our police department tonight, but we are one of the last agencies in Blaine County that does not have access for our patrolmen on some devices. We have done a great job in our police department in the employment side and staffing side, and bringing them up to date on some of the requirements set forth by the state patrol, the state regulatory bodies. And this year is our opportunity to work on some of their equipment. Right now, they have, I believe, at their disposal a pistol and a shotgun, memory serves. So these rifles will give them an added means of protecting both citizens as well as employee lives. There's a police admin assistant listed here. This position is to account for the potential construction of a new police department. There's a lot of different requirements that take place. It seems like every year they add more requirements on what the police departments have to do as it relates to filing reports, as it relates to receiving inquiries from communities, as it relates to trying to have community tip lines, as it relates to paperwork, training. In other words, there's a lot of regulatory red tape and paperwork that we feel an administrative assistant type position would be an asset for the police department. And we could reduce the stress on our patrolmen. As of now, we have to pay them from time to time overtime just to sit there and file reports. So this would be obviously a means of counteracting some of that overtime from an expense side of things. This would also serve in the new police department. And I do have renderings here. I didn't include them here because we already had 50 or so slides. I didn't want to make it so big. I think you received these renderings in a previous Board of Commissioner agenda packet, but our new police department is designed with a lobby. It's designed with a reception area. And of course, this administrative assistant would be the first person that would come in contact with the public, and it's somebody that would be in our police department at all times. Of course, our patrolmen are patrolling. Our chief sometimes is away, or he is training, things of that nature, chief's conferences, or he's out patrolling. Our lieutenant is working cases, is working the investigative side of policing, and sometimes that investigative side takes him all over the place. I think more time than not, it seems like he was out of the state this year. It just seemed to be one of those years where there were things taking place and cases taking place here that were not necessarily residents of White Lake. So that gives you some idea of the value the administrative assistant could provide the police department. You'll see 2 F-150s. We added this department request as a means of updating their patrol fleet that they have now. We have 1 car from 2021. We have 1 car from 2020, and we have 3 cars from 2015, 2016. The maintenance and repair alone on the 2015 and 2016 cars was north of $20,000 last year. The loan payment, if we chose to go through debt service on both of those trucks, was $33,000. It gives you some idea of the benefit that just from a monetary standpoint. Of course, police vehicles, police equipment comes into play when we recruit officers, comes into place retaining officers. The police officer landscape, as you'll see again in May for our salary study and personnel policy rewrite presentation, is ever changing. It is rapidly changing. And we want to give our chief and our lieutenant all the resources that we can to, again, maintain as well as recruit when the opportunity presents itself. But just from a fiscal standpoint, I think the case is to be made. We need to continue upgrading and investing in our police fleet of vehicles. And those vehicles, just as a note to the board, those vehicles were the two vehicles that we submitted a letter of interest for several months back just to get the process started. We're probably 6 months out if they're approved. It is a process and a half to get a vehicle. The reason I share that with you is if we cut one of those vehicles or we decide not to purchase those vehicles, we're essentially 2 years away from a new vehicle, the way the process is working. No longer can you call up the dealership and say, I need a vehicle. You have to order one. It has to be assembled. When they get around to it, it has to be shipped to us. They've got to take delivery. That's what we get our hand. It's a long, drawn out process. To renovate the police department, it says unknown. That is part of the project that you saw on our future project list. I believe the cost for the new police department was right around $4 million, 4.5 or $4 million. And again, we have submitted an appropriations request to our General Assembly for that project. The in-car camera program, this brings me back to updating our police department. We do not have in-car cameras. We're not alone in that regard. We do see it as a potential, a tremendous benefit from a liability standpoint, from an officer safety standpoint, from operation standpoint. Moving forward, it's just a sign of the times. The in-car camera would be one more camera that could capture the potential conflict, I guess, tell the truth of what took place when questioned. The body camera program would be body cameras worn by police officers. Again, a viewpoint, a resource for the defense attorney, a resource for our police department, a means of protection for our police department, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty, the body cameras especially are critically needed. And I will say that on the body camera and the in-car program camera, these are expenses that can be phased. We can add these to our debt service portfolio if we choose to do so through financing available to us from the company. I think that company is called Axon, if memory serves, but they do offer financing for those. You can also purchase them outright. The next project there is updating our RMS server. I want you to put a star by this one. We will talk about surplus at the end of our conversation. I don't want to jump ahead just yet. This will be a recommendation that we can pull funds that were not utilized in this year's budget to go ahead and utilize for this project this year. The RMS program, and Chief, can you, what exactly does that RMS stand for? I'm gonna get that wrong. Records Management System. It affects every single officer day to day. We collectively as a county, Bladen County, Elizabethtown, Bladen Borough, White Lake, I think that was it, came together to apply for a grant for a new RMS system, record management system. 2 or 3 years ago through Southern Software, we received that grant. We implemented that service. Now all the agencies have split from that service and we are left holding the short end of the stick. Our officers are not able to update reports digitally. They can't attach any images. They can't attach any videos. They can basically fill out a search query, send it in, and then anything past that has to be hand delivered. So that is primarily for that reason, but obviously for the reason of affecting our officers in their day-to-day jobs. One of the main reasons that we would suggest as staff to potentially look at doing this, pulling this out of the department needs and spending that money this year to get this done to bring them current, because it is also a compliance problem with the North Carolina Police Regulatory Agency, for lack of a better term. Forgive me, I should know that. And then lastly, interview equipment for the police department in the sum of $2,500. This is just to update their interview room in the existing space until we can eventually procure funds to either renovate or build a new police department with more of a state-of-the-art interview room. This is what one of those police trucks would look like. We have two trucks now that are silver. We did that so that we could have maintain some presence of unmarked cars in our community. There may be some requirements set forth there too for fleet management or best practice recommendations. This is the design that we can suggest to council. Of course, we're open to suggestions on this, but you see a white truck. That's intentional and deliberate, because a white truck can be procured much simpler than a silver or a black or a red or a colored truck. So if we got the opportunity to buy more trucks in the future, because an agency was not able to purchase their order, we could potentially do so and they would match. Key word here is we want to get to our police vehicles matching. Right now, they're all sort of, they look alike, but I wouldn't say that they match. So just in a way of updating appearance, improving curb appeal, improving morale, we want to get to a program that's producing vehicles that with a simple, more simplified color scheme, a more simplified vehicle appearance, but a fleet that matches. We can be proud, and one that we can be proud of. That's actually, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons to upgrade, because you're getting a reinforced chassis. For our fire department, we have a series of requests here. And to let you know, Chief Brennan has requested from his fire district that they purchase a set of brush truck tires, and he's requested that the town purchase a set of brush truck tires for the sum of $7,500. I did not realize those tires were over 10 years old. So they do last longer than car tires. It should be noted that's a completely different tire. But the point is, it's time to replace them. So that's why you see them there. A new truck, excuse me, a new truck to replace our 1997 model is requested. This again is being intentional and deliberate. Our debt service, if you recall from the slide earlier, has existing a 2015, is that correct? Pumper truck. That is we make our last payment next year. If we ordered a fire truck, and if you'll go forward just one slide, please. If we ordered a fire truck tomorrow, we would not see it for 2 years. So this is the start, even though it seems like 2 years is a long time. This is the start of that process. Much like a police truck, we've got to put an order in, we've got to sign a contract, and we've got to go through a procurement process that just simply takes time. But this is what the truck would look like. We have not. We have not. We looked at purchasing a used truck. We also looked at potentially renovating a truck. And the renovation, I'll come to, well, I guess I'll go ahead and say it. There are options that exist for renovation with our fleet now that we can be cognizant of for some upgrades to our fleet without having to purchase a new truck. But the 1997 model is just one that we need to replace. The pumps are worn out or wearing out. And again, it's a morale thing for our volunteers, and it's a good investment to make, particularly for our community rating. As you recall, we have a 4 on our community rating for our fire district, which is the same score that Elizabethtown has with a full paid fire department. And I think this is a good Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was the used truck that I spoke about. That truck was not worth investing in. We explored the opportunity, but yes, sir. And that's what I want to say on this procurement process. It's a combination of funds from local fire district, which is going to be a county investment. And it's a combination of direct county investment. And it's also a combination of potential financing for us. We do have the option through 4 County. We have a couple of options through USDA. But through 4 County specifically, we can procure $300,000 at 0% interest for 10 years to pay that back. That's a competitive process, but we have been in conversation with them about that. We're also looking at grants that exist at the Office of the State Fire Marshal through their fire rescue program. We are also looking at USDA specific programs to fund grants for community needs like this. So often it gets lost in translation. And Chief Brennan reminded me this the other day, but we have a fire district that covers 6 miles. And of that fire district, what would you say, Chief? 50% or more of that is state lands, which we receive no compensation for whatsoever. There's no fire district tax collected on that. 90% or so of our district is in poverty or poverty levels, as the Community Block Development Grant highlights or specifies. So we are actively looking for grants, and we are telling that story at the state level because we see an opportunity not just to better our district, but potentially better our region. During a natural disaster, we don't just cover White Lake. We end up covering White Lake, Kelly, parts of Garland, even farther north than Garland. But we have some of Sampson, we have some of Pender by default because we can get to them quicker. We have all the area in between here and there. We have White Lake, and then of course we have mutual aid with some other agencies like Bay Tree Lakes and Elizabethtown. So we end up covering a large area, truly a large area. And from a fiscal standpoint, as far as a staff recommendation goes, that debt service payment is rolling off next year. We know this truck's 2 years away. We think, especially with the contributions from the county and the fire district tax money, we can maintain the same loan payment that we're accustomed to paying, if not cheaper than what we have currently, and just keep that budgeted for and continue using that money to buy new trucks instead of using that money for something else and then trying to come back later and find money elsewhere to fund those projects. Any more questions on the truck? Okay. 2. Those are not technically approved. Those are letters of interest. If we fund these 2 trucks, we'd have 4 at that time. And we would be replacing those 2015, 2016 models. On the fire department, we are also asking to reinvest in our volunteers. I think at one time we had an incentive program, or I know other agencies around us have an incentive program. Volunteerism this day and age is a hard thing to come by. We are very fortunate, in my opinion, but I think I speak for the room, to have Chief Brennan in the role that he is in. He is a leader of men. We have 42-ish volunteers, over 40 for the sake of the conversation. Volunteers right now, which is a tremendous amount in comparison to other agencies. To give you some idea, there were 2 departments in our county that basically faced closing their doors because they could not procure volunteers to meet the training requirements that the volunteers have to go through to pass accreditation. We have a lot of volunteers. We we give them now roughly $100 stipend annually to cover their expenses. It's made to cover their expenses. But we are suggesting to you that we, as a way of investing in our volunteers, hopefully growing our volunteers, but also starting to transition and think about what a paid staff may look like, putting some type of vehicle in our budget that could ease that transition to invest in a volunteer incentive program that pays the volunteers a set amount or a policy per call or call type. In other words, if a volunteer responded to a structure fire, they would receive a stipend of $25. If a volunteer responded to a wreck, they would receive a stipend less than that. But it is done to recruit, it is done to invest, it is done to say thank you. And for us, I think it would serve the purpose of easing into that conversation of what a paid staff looks like. We also have a M&R request on the building and equipment repairs. That's an annual expense. Every year, Chief does different things. I know this year we worked on our concrete pads that led into the fire department. We replaced some of that. We cleaned up some of that, just making sure access was suitable and making sure the building was in good shape. And then finally, server switch upgrade. Chief may not like the IT side of it, but this is, again, a necessary evil in terms of where we are, and we have to break down our costs to allocate where the money is spent per the department. So it's IT related, and it's just time to update some of the lifespan on that equipment. And I say Chief may not like it because it takes away from other things we can do in the department, but I say that in jest. For our streets department, as you recall, this is one of the public works departments that is funded out of the general fund. It does get just a little bit confusing, like, for lack of a better term, that you've got general fund monies and utility fund monies funding public works operations. So I want to be clear that this is coming from the general fund. The first request on here is for seasonal Christmas decorations. That's a streets related expense, but that's, again, an effort to improve our curb appeal, to invest in our business community who is trying to do Christmas related events around town, and to just continue to give folks a reason to come to here during the quote unquote off season. And that cost would cover a sign that we could put out in front of town hall, an illuminated sign, as well as, I believe, an illuminated sign that we would put out near our flagpole on 701. That's where the $20,000 comes from. Pine straw landscaping is something that we do every year. We do that 2 to 3 times a year, just depending on the condition of what it is currently. Again, curb appeal type expense. Street signs and posts, we at one time got those through our corrections program that existed at the lake. That corrections program, Department of Corrections program, no longer exists. And we have to fund those street signs now. We do lose some signs every tourism season. They are a popular item for people to take home with them, believe it or not. So we just have to account for some monies moving forward so that we can replace those signs as they either need to be repaired or subsequently go missing. A dump truck here is a cost that would be shared. This is a common theme in the Public Works Department. This gets back to keeping the general fund and utility fund sort of separate in your mind from the different pots of money, but it will be shared with water, wastewater expenses. This dump truck would be capable of actually, it would just be a more heavy duty truck than what we have now. What we have now is essentially a leaf and limb truck. So this is just continuing to upgrade the equipment that our staff is requesting to be able to effectively do the job of storm debris cleanup or major road repair or utility repair, etc. The service truck here is one of the items that we have put off for the sake of upgrading and updating other equipment. This year's one of the recommendations that we upgrade the service truck. I believe that is a 1997 model, which has been working great, but it's starting to give us some trouble now. So That cost is in here, split with water, wastewater. And then the landscaping projects is shown. That is the landscaping project from the current project list that was talked and discussed earlier. Sanitation is simple. Sanitation is a pass-through expense. We outsource this with Waste Management currently. That contract expires in, I believe it's 3 more years. It's 3 or 4 more years. At which time we may go to bid, we may move forward with another company, but just to give you some idea, we are currently with Waste Management. The key takeaway from this slide is the consumer price index. That is estimated at 2.8%. Our contract does give Waste Management the opportunity to increase their bills to us by the annual CPI as reflected in the consumer price index. So that's why you see that number indicated on the slide. The goal here is to essentially take in through water bills, that's how we bill it, enough revenue to offset our expenditures. And we do not contract with Waste Management for leaf and limb, just for clarity. We do that in-house. Mosquito control is after last year is a hot topic around the lake. That was an interesting year from that regard, with primarily probably from all the storms that we received. But it did bring to the realization that we are in need of some more mosquito fogging equipment, which you see here listed at $25,000. That would be a new fogger, just to keep things working and current, so that we continue to provide the service for our community. And then the chemical cost is a cost that we incur every year. For aquatic control, we do have Dr. Don Lawrence in Limno Sciences represented in the budget. Her cost that has been proposed to staff through Limno Sciences, which does include the hydrilla survey, and it does include the water testing and samples for next fiscal year is $38,660. That cost is the same from last year. And we have also included manhole replacement. And this is just an effort to try and start working towards projects that we can fund to get shovels on the ground, dirt turning, boots on the ground, to try and help reduce exfiltration primarily. That's what the manhole replacement would do. When we get periods of heavy rain or when our system backs up, replacing the manhole with a deeper manhole, with a newer manhole, could potentially reduce the exfiltration and the possibility that any type of spillage or run over would run into our lake or run in outside of our system. So we want to utilize some money, or requesting to utilize some money out of aquatic control to replace manholes that are near or adjacent to the lake itself. And there are some. I think Kevin helped me out on this number. We just discussed it the other day with engineering services, but we have 352 manholes in the lake, to give you some idea. And it's about $4,000 a piece to replace them, which would cover, we think we could either replace or rehab. So we asked for 15,000. That would essentially do 3 to 4, depending on the cost. All right, that brings us into the utility fund. Water and wastewater. For our water budgetary request, we have a submersible well pump. This is this is continuing the project that we've started. We replaced one in the last fiscal year, and we are aiming to continue to replace them. The submersible well pump is just a upgrade to our system and a upgrade to the way that we draw the water into our system. We are asking to replace 5 fire hydrants. This is a cost that we have every year. This ties into Chief Brennan's accreditation process. We have to both test the volume of water that our fire hydrants are capable of producing for an emergency, as well as replace fire hydrants as they go bad, or try and be proactive. All that ties into our fire rating that we receive for our town and our fire district. We are asking to replace water lines. This is also a standardized cost that we budget for every year. This would be in the event that a water line goes bad. This is also an opportunity for staff to identify a proactive water line replacement in and around town. We are asking to replace our second chlorine building. We budgeted for one this year. That project is starting. And we're budgeting for another one next year. See the cost. We have a cutter head for our mini excavator that we purchased. That's just an attachment to help us keep easements clear and to continue to work on infrastructure related needs. This, I will put an asterisk beside cutter head. This may be an opportunity to utilize some of the surplus that we'll come to at the conclusion of our presentation. Right. Our fire hydrant testing, as mentioned, is part of our accreditation survey for the fire district. And our response to be able to respond to emergencies, we have to, we account for those costs in water because of obviously the fire hydrant is connected to our water system. Our miscellaneous tools, that's just keeping tools that are worn out or tools that break on the job updated, power tools, hand tools, different requirements of day-to-day job. We are requesting to replace a public works truck. That will be split water and wastewater. We did replace 4 trucks, I believe, 2 years ago. So this would be replacing another truck that was not replaced at that time. This is you see the dump truck listed. Again, that is part of the streets request. It is also part of the wastewater request. You see the service truck listed, again, part of the streets request, part of the wastewater request, and then you see a new backhoe listed. This is another one that we have worked with and we have made work, and just would be a good opportunity to potentially replace this. We do have some maintenance and repair costs associated with that equipment, and it is a relatively high price tag, but this would be a good time to potentially work it in. Over previous years, to give you some example, we've replaced our jetter equipment to clear our sewer lines. We bought a vac trailer, which is a vacuum trailer, to be able to work on well, it has a lot of uses, but obviously we can suck up any type of water or wastewater as we're working on projects and keep that type of any potential spillage from occurring. And what else have we done? We've done a series of big equipment purchases. So there are some high price tags here, but the water and wastewater fiscal year budget is designed to be able to accommodate 1 or 2 of these purchases every year. I would also tell you this is a great opportunity to potentially add some debt service and look at rolling cost into several fiscal years ahead, spreading the cost out. Absolutely. And then finally, you see the meter project, which was discussed as a potential future project. Wastewater. Just a couple more slides left. For wastewater, we have our sewer line replacement. Again, that looks like a high sum of money. We do budget every year for wastewater line improvement projects, wastewater line maintenance projects, and then, of course, to try and account for any type of unexpected expenditures from wastewater lines that need repair that are unknown to us currently. We have a sluice gate project in here on the second line. The sluice gate project is a part of our answer, part of staff's answer to the board when the board asks us what we can do to help reduce overflows during natural disasters, what we can do to help prevent spillages from our system, and what we can do to try and get ahead of some of the backups that we've incurred on our system. In layman's terms, the sluice gate would allow us to lower the wastewater treatment pond in anticipation, especially of a big rainfall event or anticipation of a natural disaster or anything else that may cause a backup, and be more proactive. It will not solve the problem completely. It will, however, based on engineering feedback, provide us a benefit and significantly potentially reduce some of the problems occurred over the past year. Absolutely. And we would work with the state on that. We just currently have no means of doing that in our current system. So that would be a tremendous upgrade for our system. It would also be, as again mentioned, a response to the board in terms of how we can address some of the problems that we have. Tools, those were mentioned in water. That's just split cost in terms of water and wastewater. The cutter head, again, split cost. Gas detectors for the wastewater treatment plant. It's time to update those. Those are, of course, in nature, safety devices for our guys to comply with any safety regulatory agency standards. Bypasses on all lift stations, or do one a year. You see they're $6,500. Put a pin in that. Submersible lift stations do one a year. They're $48,000. Lift station repairs, $30,000. I wanted you to see, we wanted to reflect what the cost individually would be. I want to note to the board, I would recommend if we do something like that, we do one at a time. It is greatly going to impact an appropriation that we receive. The last thing I want to do as a staff member is procure money by lobbying to General Assembly members for an appropriation and have that appropriation rescinded because our project no longer meets the description that we asked for. Keep that in the back of your mind. I am working with them legal assistance now, to try and make sure if we do one or two, we could alter that project minorly to reduce the funds requested and not be in jeopardy of potentially losing the appropriation as a whole. Again, that accounts for what the cost would be if we wanted to do one at a time or one part of one at a time. You see the public works truck that was mentioned, it's split. The dump truck that was mentioned, it's split. The service truck split, backhoe split, meter project that was on our current project slide or future project slide. These are just examples. Service truck, the examples of the dump truck, the example of the backhoe. And finally, we come to the conversation of surplus, what it is, how much we have projected, and what staff is recommending. As you can see, a budget surplus is essentially when income or revenue exceeds expenditures or actual expenses and ends up being less the expenses than the budgeted expenditures. Again, we budget based on liberal expenditure costs, conservative revenues. By design, we are or should incur a surplus every fiscal year. That is effectively our contingency money. When we get to the end of the fiscal year and that surplus remains unspent, it gives staff an opportunity to make recommendations to the board to potentially be proactive with future need costs. But I want to make sure the board understands that in our model of budgeting, that is effectively our contingency money. Sometimes it's because a project could not be completed. One example of that is our fluorine contact chamber at the wastewater treatment plant. We have been asking all but begging the contractor to do the project over the past 6 months. That project requires our chlorine contact chamber to be brought offline in order to complete the necessary project. We are now approaching our busy season. We cannot take that offline. That would be an example of surplus. It was a budgeted project. The project was not able to be completed. Another example of surplus would be when we were acquiring things like fire hydrants. We budget expenditures. We may budget $6,000 per fire hydrant based on a quote given at that time. When we receive the shipment of the fire hydrant, it may be $5,000. So the difference would be another example of surplus. So what can we do with it? As we'll discuss, we can fund next year projects. It can also be a method of growing our fund balance within reason. Bringing down money. So for 24-25, we're looking at essentially a $30,000 surplus in general fund and $60,000 surplus in utility fund. You'll see brief explanations to the surplus as to why they are there. Primarily for general fund, we have staff shortages where there were positions that were open for extended periods of time. On the utility side, we have projects that were not able to be completed, and we have several projects that came in under budget. It is amazing to me how we budget based on quotes received, but the quotes, even to this day, it started during COVID, but has remained in place now. We do not receive accurate figures until we receive shipment of material. The distributors do not have an actual cost for material. The market changes that quickly. It's complicated. We do the best we can. You see that there is some surplus there. I'd rather there be surplus again with our budget model than there be a deficiency. So some idea of what we can do with it. We've talked a little bit throughout the night as we were in different departments. I think first and foremost, that police server update is a great way to spend some of our general fund contingency money, surplus money. We do have a separate contingency pot, so don't get confused by that. But our general fund surplus, again, that would be a great expenditure to update their RMS system and to make them in compliance with state regulations, as well as ease the officers' day-to-day tasks that they're being asked to do. On the utility fund side, we could certainly look at earmarking some money into capital reserves for system improvement projects. On future projects, we could look at equipment needs individually for water or wastewater. I want you to expect, staff will have recommendations for the surplus with an action item requesting to spend the surplus, if applicable, at our May meeting for this fiscal year. And in conclusion, are there any suggestions? Are there any comments? Is there any feedback? Are there any general thoughts from the board? That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. You will get the recommendations for our budget read. Yes, sir. In a balanced budget, might I add. And I do, in closing, just want to remind you, as I started the meeting off, everybody here is more than welcome to contact me at any time to discuss anything that relates to, well, anything in general, but obviously anything that relates to the budget for any department. You are also more than welcome as department commissioners to contact your department heads and discuss budgetary needs or budgetary conversation with them as well. So take advantage of that if the opportunity exists itself. And I do appreciate your time tonight, and I appreciate your patience. And I look forward to working with you on completing this year's budget. Thank you.
Don said, if you've got anything you need to bring up or discuss with him as a result of this, then feel free to contact him on it. And I am not aware of any other business, unless someone else has something to be brought up, at tonight's meeting. And if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion second. Any discussion? Not all in favor indicate by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. We are adjourned. Thank you.